really weird. Let me see, because... Alright, hang on. I'm gonna try something. How about now? That's really weird, because one is voice activity and the other is push to talk. Oh, there it is again. Alright.
Live? Because clearly they can hear us already. Can you guys hear us both? Speak, Rye.
Speaking.
Great. I'm gonna go into not studio mode. Welcome, faux person. Welcome, Phantom. Welcome, Elix. Welcome, Resonant. Hello, Terma. Hello, Chak. Hello, Kiwi. Oh my god, we have so many people here. Hello, Jana. Hello, Lilas.
Wow. Hello, everybody.
Yeah. Hello, Retro. Thank you guys so much for coming in. This is awesome.
Sure, we're really quick too. Am I still coming in quiet? Okay, because Layla said I was coming in quiet, so I just want to make sure.
Okay, Lilas, did that sound better? Oh, yay! Thank you, Fo. Did you see that we're having the new Kickstarter too? Did you read the first book? Okay. While you wait for Poe, you never got around to it. Okay, well, now is a great time to start because there's 5 books. The 5th book is coming soon. Okay, so both of these workshops that we're doing, we did at 2 conventions this year, and we had readers request that we get on and talk about them, since they couldn't be with us. So we wanted to bring them to you. So we're gonna start this short series with creating a LitRPG universe, and if you guys like it, we'd love to do more workshops like this. They're a lot of fun, and this is our greatest love in life. So we'll start off just to kind of tell you about who we are a little bit, because there was 3 years ago we decided to start writing together, and we weren't sure how it was going to go, so we got together and created a pen name, Double Blind, where both of us took turns writing chapters and creating the world, and we weren't expecting it to get as big as it was. So this year we actually told everyone who we are. So now we can properly introduce ourselves, and I'll let Rai go first.
Okay, so as you know, I am one half of Double Blind. You guys know me as Double Blind, Ryok. I go by several different names. I've been writing since as long as I could remember. I've always had a passion for storytelling. I especially found that out when I started playing my first RPGs as a kid, since I had a lot of interest in video games. And then after that, it just kind of took off. And I wrote one story, which me and Lynx will get into later on. And it didn't do too hot. And we learned a lot from that because we both had similar experiences at that time. And then, of course, you guys all know that we started writing this story together.
And I go by Cat Lurcoy or Lynx in the Discord. I also started writing when I was very young. I published my first book in 2012, and much like Rai, it flopped. It didn't do well at all, no matter what I did. So I went to full-time commission writing, and then we decided to try the LitRPG genre because both of us love video games and love storytelling. So we combine them both, and we'll have Rai talk a little bit louder.
Okay, how does this sound right now?
Better.
Okay, does it need to be any louder? Because I'm talking comfortably.
Let's let chat decide, because I mean, I can hear you right behind me, so I'm not a great judge of this. Can you guys hear Rai okay?
It's a little better. Okay, I'm going to go up just a little bit more. Okay, how does this sound?
Whoa, that sounds...
Okay. 10% lower.
That's better.
Okay.
I can hear me, so be really careful.
Okay, yeah. It's still on push to talk, and I just want to make sure I'm at a good, comfortable level so I don't have to scream into the mic. Okay, this should work then.
Phantom, at this point, you'll want to turn up your computer because he's really loud. So we are going to start with where to start. Um, the world versus the system. So the first thing that you have to do, obviously, is write the story. So we're going to talk a little bit about story crafting overall and our system, like how we began. Your system may vary. Your approach to writing may vary. This is just what worked for us. Also, if you have any questions about anything we're talking about, feel free to throw them in chat and we will answer them as they come up. We also have like a big questions thing at the end. So if you want to save them, either way, uh, this is very relaxed back and forth and we want to help you guys. So that's our whole mission.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about getting your questions in or wondering if they're going to be answered or if we're stuck on a time limit or anything. We're just taking our time with this. So if you guys have any questions at any point, feel free to ask. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, the college PowerPoint presentation, it's the best. There will not be a quiz. Oh,
Of course there is. All right, so let me find my note here. Okay, so the world is very important, obviously. From our experience, you kind of want to do each one of these a little bit in tandem, but you definitely want to come up with the world first. You got to think about things like how does the culture play into it? How does religion play into it? Magic, technology, rules. The most important part about most of these aspects that you'll notice as you write and as you world build is that it's just important that you understand how it all works. It doesn't have to make sense logically or from a point of physics or anything like that. It just needs to make sense within the context of the world.
I figured out what was wrong with your mic. You can actually turn it down some. It was me. It's OBS.
Oh, it's OBS.
Yeah, turn yourself down.
Okay, it is down considerably now.
That's much better. Okay, keep talking for them.
I'm sick of OBS.
I'm sorry. It was my fault. Very good. Perfect. Excellent. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I realized what was wrong, and it was because I'm used to just toying with the music and not another voice on this stream. Okay. So, how many countries is enough for a world? One. You don't have to go outside of one small village if you don't want to. That's dependent on your story completely. So, if you have one character in one village and the whole story is set in that village, then one country is plenty. That's dependent on whether you want to explore more of your world.
For reference, our first stories, as well as Catgirl's, they're all smaller worlds. Even so, just as a quick background, my story was sci-fi, the first story I wrote, and it was about traveling to a new planet. And despite it being a new planet, most of the colonization had been complete, and they're just small camps. So it's not a very big world. Likewise, with her first story, with Lynx's, most of it took place in about 3 or 4 different villages, and that was most of the story. And then if you take Catgirls into account, you think about it's only 4 islands and then one mainland, and that's the entire world in the story. So it's going to depend on just what you're comfortable with, where you feel like telling your story, how much of the world you feel like delving into. Because if you think about it, when people talk to one another, they assume people know certain bits of information. So they're not going to just exposition onto a person and be like, as you know, the king of Francis III died in 1755, which was 45 years after the World War III. They're not going to start talking like that. That's just not natural speak. So the number of correct countries is just like Link said, it's whatever number is comfortable for your story.
Okay, Village, there's mine with the ugliest Amazon link of all time. That's my first book. And then Rise, he took it down, and I often threaten him that I will put it back up.
No, I will not. I will not share that with anybody anymore. I threw it into, I want to say, one channel at some point in Patreon, and then in our Discord, but then I took it down because it's just completely novice work.
Something else about this part of your development process, try not to get stuck in world building hell. World building hell is a very real place where all you're doing is making 900 details on things that you don't know how it's actually going to function until you put it into practice. So if you do really, really in-depth outlining, you could find yourself going and running yourself into corners or holes or changing things entirely. And so now you just spent like 2 months coming up with these things that you wound up nixing anyway. So keep it very broad strokes.
With that in mind, outlines are always great for all of these aspects, for the culture, the religion, the magic, the technology, the rules, and you can get fairly in depth with some of it. But I would warn against getting too in depth, too complicated, because it's very, very easy to write yourself into a hole. The more complex the rules of your world become, the easier it is to break them, and it's going to take your readers out of the world. It's not a great idea. So things like World Anvil, I'm certain a lot of you are familiar with, and other such websites that are really good for, like, creating character sheets and what is your country like and what are the races involved and all this other information that goes into it. Those are huge writer's traps. There's nothing World Anvil offers you that you can't put in a Word document. And thank you so much for the follow, Nephlite.
Thank you for the follow. Okay, Elix, you said 2 layers. Layers meaning what? And then the other question is there such thing as too much variety in world building, like deciding to add an idea like a living island to an already existing setting? No, because I know you haven't read Catgirls yet, but the first island that Matt starts on, Neat Island, we imagined it like you could walk from one side of the world to the other, like one side of the island to the other. It was very, very tiny. And now it's huge, and there's no way to actually like get there in one day. It just grew out now. Hello, Neko. So I don't think that adding more as you go is a bad thing at all. I mean, you can have a suddenly discovered island where there's different races, and you can always edit. Your first draft is your first draft. You don't have to commit to 100% of the things in your first draft.
Yeah, keep in mind, any idea can work, exactly like Village just said. It's the execution that matters. Any idea can work. Like, for example, if you're discovering new things about the world, or like, how many layers is too complicated? No amount of layers is too complicated. With that in mind, you have to take into account like the magic and technology of the world. Like, for example, let's say this island of people is not aware that a floating island exists because they've never seen it. It's on the other side of the world. So naturally, they don't even know it exists. But they discover it because they finally hit the technology to sail the seas. They finally invent the Navy or whatever. And they travel the ocean. And then they discover it. It's going to be dependent on the technology and just the general rules that you want to put into it. I find that starting with a limited base and expanding upon it over time is way, way more effective than starting with this huge document of all these rules and plot lines and complicated systems and technologies that you are going to have to somehow integrate into every single second you're writing, because you're constantly thinking about that, like, okay, I have to remember this, I have to remember that, I have to remember that this is how this technology works and this is how this religion was founded. It's too much information.
So that kind of leads into Elix, your question about things X exists because of Y. Like he was saying, it's good to start small. So yeah, it's totally fine to have 1 or 2 reasons explaining something and then build on it if you want. Like, there doesn't always need to be this big, long backstory explanation of why your character has horns. Like, I learned that thanks to reading Brandon Sanderson, I learned that it's totally okay if my character has purple hair, and I don't have to sit there and go into a million reasons why my character has purple hair. She just does. So don't don't try and over explain yourself too, because that can lose your reader. Sometimes things can be just because they are, if that makes sense.
With that in mind, I do want to hit one extra point before we move on to the next part of world building, and that's try. This is a huge problem of mine, and it creates writer paralysis. Try not to get too hung up of what is possible in the real world compared to the story that you're writing. Too often people will say, well, I don't want to create this kind of animal, or I don't want to create this plant, or have people walk around with these kinds of hair colors because genetically that's not possible in the real world. Well, it's a good thing it's not a real world now, isn't it? It's a fictional world, and you can write whatever the heck you want. You don't even have to have an extremely extravagant reason unless you want to go into that. If you want to, great. But try not to let the realities of the real world determine how your fictional world functions.
And that's big in fantasy. Now, if you're doing something where I wrote like Ophelia, where it's set in 1956 Cicero, there are magical beings, but you're totally not real. So that kind of derives. But I still do a ton of research on 1956 Illinois to make sure I am hitting all of those beats correctly. So in a fantasy world, yeah, things can just be because they are. But if you're trying to write something that's more real, you'll want to do the research as you're writing.
Exactly as she said. And then, Fao, can you expand on what you mean by that?
Oh, it went further on me. How dare you, PowerPoint? Can I take a step back? Yeah. Okay. Psyche K is one of the best anime I have ever watched, 100%.
Psyche K is a great example because even though it is a comedy, you just accept everything that's happening.
Yeah, too many theoretical stories. I think he means like if you have a lot of ideas in the world that could play out. It depends on if they're like conflicting theoretical stories.
So quickly touching on that, there are usually two types of writers. There are those who like to stick to an outline and those who are referred to themselves as discovery writers. Me and Lynx are discovery writers. So if that sort of thing happens to you where you end up writing something and then you're like, oh no, it's contradicting something I had planned for this chapter or the story or this or this character's backstory wasn't going how I planned it, I find in most cases it's best to let the characters talk to you and let the characters guide you. The story will usually feel a lot more natural that way. It'll flow better. If you are trying to force characters into scenarios simply because you want those events to happen, it can come off forced to your reader as well.
And one thing that I've been trying to tell people who are just starting to get into writing and have never tackled something really big is to write triptychs or like little one shots of things in your world. So I have a typewriter, and what I like to do is I get on there and I have this big story I've been trying to work on since I was like 17. But I'll just write little one page scenes of like a character and what they're doing that day and what they're feeling that moment. And that helps me get a better feeling of the overall world and kind of things that fit in. But they're not part of the main story, so it's easy to either like accept it or kind of throw them out afterward.
As far as over explaining little details, there is such a thing as excessive explanation or excessive writing in some scenarios. You will have to try to find your own balance, but from my experience, it depends on the direness of the situation and how important that event is to what's going on at that moment. So, say for example, there's a girl who ran away from her parents and she's seeking asylum somewhere, and she comes upon a caravan and they're like, oh hey, we're taking people to the next town for a small fee. This might be a really good opportunity to get into her headspace, have her talk to these people, find out who they are, and that'll be dependent entirely on like what you find important for that character at that moment. So for me, it's usually how important that situation is to the narrative and as far as you're aware. And you can always expand on that later to your reader.
Hey, Calamity. Also, again, to just kind of, I do editing a lot too, if you don't notice. write everything. Like, it's totally fine in your first draft if you are over explaining, putting too much dialogue, making it seem like, oh my god, this is taking way too long. It doesn't matter because you can go back and clip down what doesn't feel like it flows well later. Like, you can go in and change it. I've found personally it's a lot easier when I'm editing either my work or someone else's work to take stuff out that feels redundant rather than add things in that you're like, I feel like this should really be here, but now I need to try and fit it into the whole world. So it's easier to cut back in this case.
I'll second what she said. Your first draft is never your final draft. If you want it to turn out nice, if you really want to be happy with the work, you are probably going to edit that thing at least 3 or 4 times before you're happy with it.
Just to show you really quick here, let me find it. Okay, so everyone's Catgirl Volume 1. This is our notes document from when I was editing it and going through it. Here are the world rules that we established after the fact. Here are the facts. Here are 200 notes of things that we changed and axed and got rid of and fixed and had to adjust. So it reads very little like what it started as on Royal Road and Reddit. It is now a totally different beast.
As far as that's concerned, that's the answer to that is going to be very contextual. If it's, for example, a story like mine was very like that. It's a sci-fi story where people have enough technology to space travel from one planet to another, and when they hit that planet, they find the remnants of a civilization that used to be there. That's gonna depend on what you want to say there. Like, is the story about discovering new planets and new cultures? Is it about colonizing a new planet? It's going to depend. It's going to be highly contextual.
We finally watched Firefly, and I think that did like space travel futuristic with multiple different human cultures together to see what would happen in one of the best ways that I could ever imagine.
Yeah, highly recommend Firefly.
I absolutely agree with what Rai has to say. Is it depends on your story and what you're looking to achieve with your story, because it'll have some kind of message. Like, what is your goal at the end of the story? Do you want to show that there's tension between these different cultures, that they're all working together in this situation, or like this modern society, or what they bring to the table? There's a lot of different ways you could take that.
With that in mind, I think we are good to move on to the characters.
Woohoo! So, characters in this context, we're going to be talking about our characters in a LitRPG sense. That comes up a little bit differently because they're going to act differently and be incorporated into the world differently rather than like normal fantasy characters or even fiction, like nonfiction characters that you're putting in there. You can start.
Thank you. Had something in my throat. All right. So there was something that Lynx told me years and years ago when we were writing, when we first met. And one of my favorite things when it comes to developing characters is beyond a brief backstory of them. What I find is really important is finding their truth. Like, what guides this character? Is there a particular motive that guides them? Is there a particular ethic value that guides them? This will help you determine their speech patterns, what their body language looks like when they talk, how they handle difficult situations, as many of you know, like what happens to Matt at the end of book 1, situations like that. I like to start with like a basic outline of, okay, here's this character's looks, here's their general personality, and then I just let myself go. This works for me, but I know some people are also going to want to work off of outlines. Like Casket said earlier, he said he's an outline guy. That's totally fine. You do what you find works for you. And then after that, I actually find that I have an easier time coming up with my main character if I start with supporting characters first. and like, okay, well, what are these characters going to look like? What kind of characters live in this world? How do they live and breathe, depending on what my world looks like? And then once I come up with a brief, very brief outline, like just basic character traits, then I decide what kind of character I think is going to run in that world well. And for us, it turned out to be Matt.
So, as far as the truth goes, you honestly don't need to have anything complicated. Like the girls that you see up top, Cannoli, the second one in, her truth is she wants to help her friends. Um, Raven is in search of forgiveness. Saris needs to protect. Kiki's was actually really hard to find for a while. We struggled with figuring out Kiki's character um, until like the end of book one, and we wound up changing a lot of her dialogue and a lot of her interactions to her being more like she wants to be like her mom and like walk in her mom's footsteps. So if you mean vibe, so by vibe do you mean like whether it's a comedy, drama, like what genre, or faux? I'm trying to understand what vibe. But yeah, what Rai said, absolutely. Like having a good just start and ground to your characters, just one thing about them will help you shape character vibe. So kind of like I was saying, it took us a while to figure out where Kiki was, but we knew what kind of characters the other ones would be. Oh, we have a lot of questions. Okay, I'm gonna try and take these one at a time. Thank you guys so much for coming and asking questions. This is awesome. Cannoli, we knew we wanted her to be the very cute friend, but her character does change over time, and I think that's really important to be open to with your characters too, is that they're not going to stay the same person. They shouldn't stay the same person, or else your story is never going to move, because character growth, especially for us, is what's going to move your plot forward, unless you are like a plotter instead of like a more character driven story. But for us, unless they change, like nothing happens.
I will answer Elix's question on how you stop a character from becoming a Mary Sue. Give them problems, give them issues, things that they're struggling with. Raven, for example, she's got a lot of baggage. She's got a ton of baggage. She's nice. She cares about people, but she's very opinionated. She's under the impression that she calls it as she sees it, or calls it as it is in her mind. So little traits like that can help. Let your characters make mistakes. Let them be confident and fail. That's also very important for creating realistic characters. For example, I won't spoil too much in case some people haven't read it, but there are several opportunities where Matt could have done better, but he stumbles a lot in the beginning because he's just so confident and complacent in his knowledge of RPGs that he's just like, no, I've done this tutorial, I've done that, I don't need to hear about this. All I care about is Catgirls. We don't need to discuss this. So he skips the tutorial, and he ends up paying pretty badly for it in the beginning. He gets okay, but he does end up with some scars. Things like that will help your character feel way more realistic. Because the reality is people stumble, people make mistakes, they think they know everything, and then their world gets shattered when they find out they're wrong. And that's important. You need to make sure that characters can do that. I am not saying that you cannot create a character who is intelligent and is exceptionally skilled in almost everything they do, but you can also use that to your advantage to create negative traits about them. Like, for example, anybody who's watched Death Note, Light Yagami is extremely calculating, and he knows how to get out of almost any situation. But he has a lot of negative traits that make him kind of an asshole. So that's just an example of taking those kinds of characters and adding traits to them. But to make a long story short, you want to give them negative traits in some area. You don't want them to always have the answer, always have the best kind words. You want to give them opinions. You want to make them, well, people is the best way I can put it.
I think it's really important to make realistic negative traits. That's a huge thing that I find when I read a lot of like YA novels now, is the girl always has her flaws, or like she can't tell when boys like her. Like there's just they're not real flaws.
That is not a flaw.
not flaw. Like she I love the like wicker basket. She stumbles, but she's perfect in combat. Like don't do that. Like have a realistic thing. Like everyone has flaws. Like chat was saying, like Ryan was saying, it's what makes us human. So have a balance. Have them. They can totally be super great at something, but still not very good in other ways.
Dr. House is also a really good example because he's a brilliant person, but he is a total jerk. He doesn't care anything about his patients. He is always just thinking about, oh, this is really interesting. That's really fascinating. I have to solve the problem. And he couldn't care less what happens to people because of it. So that's another good example as well. Um, One thing I do want to hit real quick as far as realism is concerned, and I'm sure some people in here can back me up when I say this, is combat is a scary thing. Combat is not a fun thing. What I see a lot of people giving Matt crap for is his reactions in combat. Like he doesn't make a lot of the right decisions. He throws, he loses his temper, or he panics. And the thing is, that's how most of us would react, though. Most of us have maybe been in a fist fight with our friends, and that's it. But if you are fighting for your life, and your friend could die at any second, or you could die at any second, you're gonna start trembling. You're gonna shake. You're gonna sweat. You don't know what actions to take. You're gonna mess up. You're gonna trip. These are important factors to take into account. Now, if this character had more of a militaristic background, then yeah, Matt probably would be okay. But these are just important factors to take into account whenever you're developing characters.
I think I read that the average fight lasts 45 seconds because people run out of breath after that amount of time.
It's
So,
true.
yeah, when I see these like 10, 20, 30-minute fights where they're just going hand to hand, sword to sword, I'm like, okay, but could you really hold a sword and just stand there for 30 minutes, let alone swing it? So I absolutely agree to make sure you keep those things realistic. And I'm going to scroll up and grab Toasty's question. Do you two lean into character tropes when designing characters more, or try to subvert them? We absolutely started with some tropes with some of the Catgirls that we have before we decided to make them like realistic. So Kiki was definitely like the loyal friend next door. Cannoli is the cinnamon bun. Raven, Rai literally said, I want my red-haired tsundere. And Saris was the loyal knight. But as we wrote them more is when they really got more of a background. So I totally think it's fine if you want to start with a trope and then develop them from there, but still give them kind of aspects of them.
Let's see. Yeah, that's a good point, Terma. You get the adrenaline boost. Yeah, it can cause you to freak out and overthrow. There's so many problems that can happen when adrenaline's pumping through you because you start shaking. Lilas asks, how crippling should flaws be in situations where they arise? That's gonna be determined by you and how you see your character approaching situations. For example, like Saris. Saris is a very calm, very calculating person who has a lot of combat experience. She's been training for this for most of her life. She's had extensive study both in world education and in combat. She's learned a lot of things. She's very educated. And her she might be frightened when she fights. She might be frightened when she comes up to a situation that she's unfamiliar with, but due to her background, she knows how to approach situations from a more stoic and thoughtful position. So she's going to take her time to think about it and say, okay, well, I shouldn't jump the gun. All right, how do we handle this situation? Whereas Raven will be like, fuck it, who cares? And Cannoli would be a little bit more timid. She wouldn't know what to think. And Kiki would be a lot like Saris in some areas, where she's a little more level-headed, like, okay, I think I can handle this situation, but it's probably gonna suck.
Also, in that vein, was Cannoli, and a lot of people got mad at her in book 4. So in book 4, there's a really terrifying fucking fight that doesn't actually go through, and Cannoli panics and jumps into Matt's arms, and that's all she shuts down entirely, and people got so mad at her. but that's who she is. It scared her. She didn't know what to do. So whereas like Rye was saying, Saris and Raven rise to the occasion, she was like, fuck this, like we need to go to the city right now. I can't move. So it's gonna have a lot of varying levels depending on who your character is, and it depends on what the situation is. Is having a flaw manifested in a character's abilities too overt? Do you mean like in what situation? Unless Ryan knows what you're saying. Do you mean like they get an ability for it, or? That's a great point, Village. Courage and bravery are not the absence of fear. You can still be very, very scared and step up and try and work it out.
If anything, bravery is the courage to stand up despite being scared.
I think that would kind of depend on your world, and especially if you're doing a LitRPG with like ability aspects, because that means that they exist for everybody. Rye, your thoughts?
I agree with what she said. It is going to depend on the world's functions primarily. You can have something like that. Let's see. Can I think of an example? Kind of the same thing, sorta. In Konosuba, Aqua has a bunch of party tricks, a bunch of parlor tricks, and she is just a wine drinker and just focuses on all those things. And it works for that world because she's so full of herself. She's convinced she's a goddess and that people should be treating her the same as they did in heaven. But it's gonna very much depend on the world rules and how your magic system works, because yeah, you can make that work. Like Village was saying earlier, you can make any idea work. It's just the execution.
And it also depends, like his comparison was Konosuba. It depends on the tone of your story. So if you're going something for more comedic effect, then absolutely jump into it and make them all themed around it. But if I took Konosuba and tried to apply it to our rules, that would mean that a lot of other people could also have Aqua's party trick things and it wouldn't fit them. So why would they ever pick that class? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to answer Terma's. Is it alright to base a real life people into your characters, like take bits and pieces of yourself and sprinkle into your character? Yes, absolutely, 100%. Every single character I have ever written has a little piece of me in them, and I can feel it, and it might be a different one, or it might be a little piece of somebody I know. Write what you know.
I agree 100%. Just to add to what she said, there are little pieces of me that I can see in every single one of the Catgirls that we've written thus far, including Matt. I called Matt a Catgirl, including the man, Matt. But that's perfectly okay. What I always try to stress to people is that the character does not represent who I am as a person, but there are little pieces of me sprinkled in each person. On that note, I actually very much enjoy writing Saris and Destiny because a lot of their thought processes are similar to my own.
Yeah, exactly. Or Neko, like, there are certain characters that we have very, very deep ties to that we can feel out. And there are a lot of situations for different characters that they go through that we've been through. So, when we take turns, sometimes it'll be like, oh no, like I've been through something like this, so I want to write this chapter because I feel like I can really get into this, and vice versa. So it's like having experienced those things can only help you. So absolutely, like, pour yourself into them. Okay, I think we can keep going down to character types. We kind of talked about that. So on the slide it says, e.g. the Holy Trinity. That's in terms of gaming. So the Holy Trinity is always your tank, your healer, your DPS. So you want to decide for a LitRPG, the characters that you have, are you going to have parties like that where it's like the Holy Trinity, or very not original, like standard gameplay in tabletop RPGs? Or will it be something more like PSO, where Phantasy Star, where you can just kind of pick one thing and then everyone gets to play together no matter what their class is, and it still works? Anything to add, Rye? Or do you want me to go to the next one?
No, I think we're good there. I think we're very good in the character area. We can move on. Okay.
This is all you.
This is all me. All right. So if you are not writing a lit RPG or a game lit of any kind, you can pretty much ignore this part of the panel. But for those of you who would want to do something like this has been a really fun and therapeutic part of my writing process because I spent a lot of my life coming up with tabletop games, and I know Lilas is also homebrewing his own. With LitRPG elements, for anybody who's not familiar, LitRPGs are stories which take RPG elements, game elements, and incorporate them into the world and make them part of how the world functions. Exactly like how most of you know, Kiki shoots enough stuff, gets enough experience, and then she can put her dexterity up, or something like that. Something to that effect. If you do want to use a system like this, what I have enjoyed doing more is creating interesting and unique classes and determining how they affect that world. In what way do they play a part in how the world functions? For example, many of you at this point are aware that catgirls are typically born with an affinity for an element. They don't know what it is, but it'll emerge at some point in their lives when they come of age. And when they find that out, it's like, oh, cool, that's a nice thing to find out. And mage classes are based around what affinity you had, and you can incorporate that into some of your skills. That's a loose idea. If you do decide to use RPG elements in your story, there are typically two ways to go about it. Either one, you can do what's really, really popular in the genre, and the character is overpowered. They have some sort of niche skill or some sort of niche ability or some sort of really obtuse way of doing things that just seems to always work out for them. In the nicest way possible, these are Mary Sue's. And if you're okay with writing that, all the more power to you. But if you do not want to go that route of overpowered protagonist kun solves everybody's issues despite knowing little to nothing about the native world, if you don't want to write that, then you'll want to write something like we have with Catgirls, at which point you do want to integrate the system into the world. And if you're going to do that, I suggest really taking a look at, once you're done with the world, start with the RPG elements second, is what I would do in the case of a lit RPG. That's the exception I would make to this. Normally with the panel, I would say start with the world, go with the characters, then the RPG elements. But if you are doing a lit RPG, I find that doing the RPG elements secondly, after the world, is more effective because that also integrates itself into the world and helps create the characters better. And then you just decide what's important to you. Is combat what rules the world? Is crafting what rules the world? Is there an exchange of ideas between the two systems? A lot of this is going to be determined by what you find valuable in a lot of the games that you find. For me, for example, I grew up with games like Ragnarok Online and Phantasy Star Online. And for those of you who have played those games, you might see that in a lot of the RPG systems. You might recognize some familiarity there. Because I was the type who really appreciated having lots of unique characters and lots of unique systems that they may not be balanced, but they're interesting. And interesting is always more fun than balanced. If things become too balanced, it starts to lose a lot of its luster, and it can get boring after a time because it's like, well, I know how this goes, okay? It's exactly like how Matt thought. He comes in the world like, I don't need to know all this because there's always the tank, healer, DPS, whatever. I know how it all works. I'll just pick a tank class and I'll be fine. And he was very, very wrong. To go into that a little bit deeper as far as whether or not there's a disparity between higher level characters and lower level characters, you could determine whether or not there's like a godly effect between capped characters, or if there is a cap, there may not be for your story. between smaller characters like Matt. Because Kailu, for those of you who are aware, is a very powerful character. He's capped on his levels, and compared to Matt, he's a god essentially. Let's see. Is having the main character be part of a rare class to Mary Sue I'm special? Actually, that's going back into what I was discussing earlier with typical LitRPG. Typical LitRPG does actually feature exactly what you were just saying. Usually the person ends up with some sort of ability or stat or class or knowledge that they shouldn't have that breaks the system if they're clever with it. And 99% of the time they are clever with it. They break the system and people are amazed and they can't believe this has ever happened. This has never happened before. And those, again, personally speaking, those are Mary Sue's to me. But people like them. They're okay with them. That's just going to depend on whether or not that's the kind of character you want to write for that story. Also, in terms of levels, when writing a cyberpunk lit RPG, would rep be its own gain level and experience to represent them becoming more popular and notable? That depends on to what degree you want that to actually be represented, among those who live in the world. In a video game, it's really easy to be like, oh, my rep value went up, and therefore that tells the game that I get more offers from the other clans and gangs in the story. Because I've played Cyberpunk, so I know how that works. And it works well in a game, but in a fictional world where there's people who are living and breathing and living their normal lives, it feels kind of meta. It feels like it doesn't quite fit the world. It feels kind of strange. There are a lot of things you could do with that. There could be a central system that recognizes that and sends out information to people through their cell phones or whatever information device they have to help you get more jobs. That's one option. It could be a separate stat where when they run into people, they feel this inclination to work with you and they can't explain it. You have several different options that you can work with there.
So to take a step back, I agree with Jack. So if there's rare classes, super classes, if you have them available to everyone in the world, it feels a lot better. It feels a lot more natural. So for example, Yomi in our story is a dark priest, but she kind of breaks the system and gets a summon that she shouldn't have from demonology, which is, it's interesting. Like, it's a girl in the world that did it. So then if one of the men did it, it wouldn't feel as the chosen one. Kind of like Village said, they're playing with the Trojan run thing. So the guy gets to the whole world and they get the super special thing because of who they are, and they solve all of the world's problems in 5 minutes. And with us, we wanted to start out this story by just putting a normal 20-year-old dude in a world that was going to be way harder than he thought, even though the outside looked cute and fluffy. But he gets there and oh shit, it's not like that at all. So any of the guys could access like unique classes. And they do, all of the men in our story actually can do second classes and what's that called? Subclass. They can subclass and the girls can't. So they still get something that the girls can't do, but it feels less chosen one, less like they're walking in and, yep, I am the main character and I know you've had this world for 1,000 years, but I will fix everything in 5 minutes.
To quickly talk about what Fao was saying too with rep. Fo, thank you. My tongue. So one thing you can determine too is, does the number dictate your popularity or does your popularity dictate your number? That the distinction is very important, because the rep could be an indicator of how well known you are. Or so does it stay that way? Is that a static number? Like once you hit it, does that just say, oh, this is how much rep you have, and it just never goes down? Is there any decay? Or as you do more things, does that number come up? That distinction is very important. And I think you could easily make an ability in your world that says, oh, if your rep hits certain amount, you can perform X, Y, or Z ability. I don't think there would be anything wrong with that.
Rep is a really good way to transition into the last statement where we say avoid the mind. What does this work in games but not stories? In LitRPG, you will learn that there are things in games that do not work in a story novel setting while you're writing them out. So, for example, rep. Say I have a rep score of 1,000. How is anybody else going to know that? Are they checking it on their phone? Do I have a number above my head? Like, where popularity, you might have seen my face all over social media. It could be anywhere. Like, there could be a warrant out for my arrest. But how would you portray that to other characters? How would they know that my rep score is way high and they need to know who I am? Like, does my name go out in mass chain emails? We ran into that problem where it says mind because we had knowledge. And knowledge is a really difficult thing to gauge because knowledge encompasses everything. So reading a book, cooking a recipe, picking up something and learning how to use it. Like, at what point does it stop? It just became too big a thing, so we ditched the number because it wasn't working in terms of the story.
And then Elix, how do you mean level number in terms of abilities?
I think he means like level 1, level 2, level 3 abilities, which I can pull up some examples. I'm going to pull up the secret world document that Rai doesn't let me share anywhere. Here we go. Oh,
as long as they don't get to see it.
They can see a little bit.
The important parts, anyway.
Well, okay, they can see fighter. Here, they can see fighter. So with ours, as you know, all the guys have the iPods and they can see the numbers. And Rai goes in here and actually makes changes for what each level does so that it is modifying what is happening in real time instead of just like this does 10 more damage. Like, it can gain more enmity, it can do a moderate increase versus a minor increase, because you didn't do like flat numbers, right? So no flat numbers. I know, it's the sacred document. So they know, and like the Catgirls inherently know what level of a skill they're at.
Basically, too, going back to that, the body is much easier to control than the mind. That's why when it came to RPG elements, we wanted to avoid things like mind or intelligence or wisdom, because those change all the time. It's not a stat I've ever been a fan of in any video game, because you have to be smart to know how to fight. But it's just like, oh, well, intelligence is my dump stat for fighter, so I just take it down to 6 or 8 and throw the rest of my points into strength and dexterity. So I'm dumb as a rock, but I hit like a truck. I don't like that. I've never been a fan of that. I know some people may have a different opinion of that, but the body is much easier to restrict and control than the mind. If you try to have a thought, does some fantastic force just stop you and hit you and be like, nope, can't have that thought because you're just not intelligent enough. It doesn't make any sense.
The other system we had to totally ditch was affinity. So in visual novels and dating sims, you have the affinity thing, right? Where you can go talk to a girl every day and you get the points, and then you give her gifts and you get more points, and the end game is that you're dating. It did not work in our world for 2 reasons. One, I was sitting there imagining Matt like talking to Kiki and saying something, and like she says something and then he's mentally going through what like options to reply, and that gives him points. Like that was one. And 2, in our world there's only 4 men, so the whole point is for them to have kittens. So what constitutes a 100 affinity score? Like, love isn't allowed. So hooray, you gave her 20 fish and a hug, but you're still at the same endgame.
Yeah, it's just a weird thing to try and conceptualize and put into a real living, breathing world, because that's not how people work. They don't have like a point value where it's just like, okay, well, once you give me a dozen roses, a dozen bouquets, then we can get married. That's just not how people work. It's not like, okay, if I just keep giving her roses, it's just going to keep her points going up. It doesn't make any sense. So we actually like refit the affinity system to mean something else.
We just took it out. Like, there's no affinity system anymore.
Well, I mean like an affinity for an element.
Elemental affinity. Okay. Is it okay to give a character an esoteric but not particularly powerful ability that ties to the character, like a gambler having a special power? So funny that you should ask that, because in a story that I'm writing with Sky, the main character was Dad is here. He's behind me and we're talking. Hi, Carmine. The main character was a dealer in Las Vegas. So in his new life, he is a swashbuckler, and I gave him a skill where he can flip a coin and like think of something that they need, whether that's like reset a cooldown or find a treasure, and it'll spend his money based on what he's asking. So the harder thing to fulfill, the more money it takes. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it's like those crappy genies where you have to be really specific or else it will not tell you what you want. It'll tell you the most literal thing possible. But that is very, like, I made that for him. So I think it's totally okay to have something like that.
Once again, going back to, as long as it's consistent within your system, it's fine. Like 9 out of 10 times, it's fine. If you want to work off of a luck-based mechanic, then do it. I encourage it.
I honestly hate the word quirky. What do you mean by quirky? Like, I'm so quirky, teehee, because not important.
Oh, I think he means like how every other girl Disney puts out now is quirky. Like, oh, I'm just so weird. Like, haha, okay, calm down. That sort of personality.
Right people, not Disney characters. Yes, Sky is here, talking about Jack. Quirky, so like we were saying earlier, to make realistic characters, make them people, and then give them flaws. Yeah, let me be clear, because like I hear quirky, and like he said, I think Disney pro tag, and I'm just like, no, that's not a person. Would you roll in real life dice, Rye, to determine something? Because we have gone into fights where he has no idea.
Both work. Like if we're referring to luck-based powers, I'm assuming still.
You can always write it to fit your narrative. You don't have to roll actual dice. Then you're kind of playing a tabletop game with yourself.
Yeah.
I just kind of decide what the outcome will be, and then I give them whatever. Okay, while Lilas redefines quirky for me, I'm going to go to the next slide. Oh, now we actually get into each one of these. We haven't done this PowerPoint in a while.
No, we haven't. I guess we can just do this briefly because we've already kind of gone into each one of these in depth.
Like these are, when we were mentioning world building and we were talking about world building, these are the things that we like to outline a little bit. So, did you want to start? Sorry, I was trying to give you leeway.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just going to sit here and let them take a screenshot or do whatever they need to because we've done most of this already. We've talked about how big the world
Not really,
can be.
though. Here, I'll go over. I'll give the
Yeah,
brief overview.
feel free.
Okay, so topography and geography. Decide if you want a beachside place, a mountain, and this is for your starting. So if you're doing a really big world, like, I want to call ours a really big world, even though it's just a freaking cat's paw, but it feels huge. So some of our islands are flat, some of them have mountains, some get snow, some are deserts. Decide kind of what the topography looks like and the geography looks like, because that's going to determine your character's background. They can determine what jobs they have, their economy, like how they function as a society. Culture, religion, races. It's good to decide for religion for your first main character, at least. Is there one god? Is there multiple gods? Are there no gods? Is there something else? Is it nature? Just kind of what's running, because religion is very important in every single culture. It's just, it has different forms. We kind of talked on races. We'll answer Foe's question about magic and technology in just a second because it's right there. The brief history, like we were saying, don't overdo this. Just a few things about how your main character got here is great, or how the world started. It doesn't need a 40,000 word intro. And then leaders and government, who's in charge? Just decide who's in charge right there. But how do you handle magic plus technology? I will let Rye answer.
So this is actually much easier to figure out than it may appear. I like to live by the rule of necessity is the mother of invention. If there's no necessary need to advance, typically it's going to take a while before it gets to that point. The reason most inventions were made was because there was a necessity for it somewhere. If magic is solving most of the problems, there's not a whole lot of need for much technology, and vice versa. For an example of a world which incorporates both magic and technology, most of the Final Fantasy games usually end up taking characters to space or incorporating any sort of Magitech armor and all kinds of machinery. And I'll use 14 as an example, Final Fantasy 14. There's a race of people called the Garleans who cannot manipulate any of the ether in the air that most living creatures can use. So they can't use magic. They have zero ability to use any type of magic. So in the absence of magic, they invent things like gunblades, gunpowder, explosives, airships, all kinds of missiles, air and tanks. They come up with these ideas because they have no other methods to create these things.
I get to talk about bonds mages.
You have the floor, sweetheart.
Foe asked, is giving a country a unique, coveted, and powerful resource that is hard to replicate too cliche? It 100% depends on the resource, the power, and what you're giving them. But let me talk about bonds mages for a moment. So there's a series called Gentlemen Bastards, and the first book is Lies of Locke Lamora, and it had some of the best world building and character driven narrative I have read in a long time. And then he fucking introduces bonds mages, which are a group of mages from a small country that can literally nuke the world. And if you kill one, then the rest of the bonds mages come after you and flatten your city. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. So there's no way to kill them. There's no way to stop them. And for some reason, bonds mages are working as mercenaries. So you can just pay them money to do literally whatever you want. You can have them kill people. You can have them kill whole groups of people. They would take a promise of payment. They were way too fucking powerful. It made no sense within the story. It totally ruined the narrative for me. I will not read any of the other books. So don't go too hard on like, this country has everything, but they're not giving out anything for any reason, because then you have the question of, why isn't anyone attacking them? Why aren't they getting invaded? Why aren't they ruling the world? Like, there's too many questions if you make one place too powerful.
I will basically second exactly what she said, word for word. That's exactly how I feel about it as well.
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, that's just kind of like a your story. It's really important to remember that a lot of these elements are going to depend on what you're writing and how you write it and what take you want to go with it.
Yeah, you can have a little bit of fun with that too. Maybe there's 3 different countries or 3 different cities working on a similar concept, but each one of their designs looks different.
Scott Lynch is watching this stream right now. Fuck you, man. Like, you broke my heart. Oh, we're going to talk about the characters a little bit again.
Whee!
We will say that again at the end, Terma, because that's in every presentation.
So I'll just quickly go through this. Who's the main character? Why? It's important to try and establish a character that you think can help guide the story along. Matt is a really good character for our story because he comes in thinking, you know, I'll get all these Catgirl harems. It's going to be wonderful. I've played so many RPGs. It'll be easy. And he knows nothing about the world. So from a writing perspective too, it helps make it easier for us to explain the world through the eyes of a person who's never seen it. For those of you who have read the Catgirl chapters that are actually take the perspective of a Catgirl, you'll notice that there's a lot less explanation because most of the explanation doesn't need to be there. These are facts, these are terms that Catgirls are very familiar with, and the writing will second that and enforce that. Ambitions, goals, dreams, insecurities, these kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier with trying to avoid creating Mary Sue's. It's very important to give them a loose set of goals. You don't have to go super in depth with it at all. You can start off very, very light. Matt comes because he wants a harem. His goal is to get the harem. That's it. That's all it is. He has insecurities that show up later on, but to be honest, Lynx and I were not aware of what those insecurities were going to be until we got further into the story and helped the characters develop a bit more. because at that point we're still getting a feel for them, seeing what makes them tick. Going back to the Holy Trinity, if you're writing a LitRPG, tank, DPS, healer is considered the Holy Trinity in a lot of video games. If you want to incorporate it, feel free. If you want to do a system more in line with something like Catgirls, that's great too. Neither system is incorrect. And then determine if, Link's touched on this a little bit as well, can everyone do everything, why or why not? They don't even have to be explicitly explained at first, or even have a incredibly complex and metaphorical reason for why they can't do this. It doesn't have to be anything like that. The system in our world accommodates men more than it does the Catgirls. The men can get subclasses, for example, while the Catgirls cannot. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch on real quick, hun?
I was going to touch on Foe's question real quick. When it comes to writing multiple stories in the same setting, even if they don't share 100% same cast, should each major arc increase the stakes? Let me show you. This is the 3-act story structure. There's also a 7-act one called Save the Cat that you can go by, but this is the easiest one to follow. Each one of our books in the series has this story structure. So it's set in the same world. Sometimes it follows different characters. Sometimes the story changes a little bit. But your book, like when you break them up, should always have some kind of an inciting incident, give you the exposition, the rising action, climax, and then a resolution. So I find that sometimes when series go, like web novels, go into split up books, they'll forgo this. So there's like whole books of just exposition. And that is not what you want to do, because when it comes to Amazon and you're selling wide, you're going to lose a lot of readers since you don't have that story structure anymore. Now it doesn't feel like a normal story.
To kind of loosely touch on what Village is saying about increasing stakes, you'll want to be careful with how you increase stakes, especially in LitRPG. It can become very predictable, and you can definitely write yourself into a corner if the bar is constantly being raised. Like if there's a certain power level that they have to hit, or it's getting so ridiculous that you can wipe out millions of characters with a single blast of magic, you can easily write yourself into a corner, and it becomes predictable to your readers to the point where it's like, you know, this is boring. I already know he's going to win. Everything's going to work out in the end. So for Catgirls, we approach situations more from a how is this troubling to this character or this group of people, and what kind of skill set does it take to solve it?
And to echo that, your climax doesn't have to be this big giant fight. Same, Elix. Oh my god. Okay. Also the same reason I stopped watching Dragon Ball. I joked earlier in our Discord about the Shonen Jump power scale, because that is what happens, is you see these characters that are hitting over 9,000 and they're hitting all of these power, and I can't watch Jujutsu Kaisen for the same reason. It's just like the unstoppable force meets the immovable object, and that's not fun anymore. There's no stakes anymore. So your climax doesn't have to be something world-ending every time, and your stakes don't have to be insane. Your stakes could literally be the party is in trouble and they need to get out of it. It could be one really nasty fight that they have to go through. Like, the climax doesn't have to be huge. We're seeing a lot of that actually right now with Final Fantasy XIV, where the story is suffering because they keep raising the stakes way too much, in our opinion. This is our humble opinion. Don't shut down my stream, Square. Thank you.
I'm going to echo what she said. Yes, actually having smaller arcs is okay. Personal arcs are also okay. The climax is exactly like she said, a rising action. It doesn't have to be a significant battle or a terrible fire that wipes out the entire village or something catastrophic. It doesn't have to be world-ending or terribly destroying. It just has to be climactic in some way. It's a pivotal point at which things are rising or changing for the characters that are involved in the story. Taking the first book, for example, the climax is not a typical climax. There is a fight, but it's not this long, drawn-out, dramatic fight. It's actually pretty lukewarm for the most part, and then it descends, and then we find out what Matt's dealing with, and then we resolve that by the end of the book.
I think we kind of covered everything else on this. Yes, Fove. Matt, as the main character, by book 3, he actually stops being like the main character. We start switching around. And that's totally dependent on the story you want to tell. It doesn't have to stay. If you, Brandon Sanderson, Stormlight, kind of everyone's the main character. There's no real like one driving force.
I find stories like that personally to be more interesting because it makes every character feel like they're important in some way to the narrative.
Yeah, so kind of like I was typing too, where the unstoppable force versus the immovable object fights. Those fights are fine as long as something happens and there's some kind of consequence at the end. That's my biggest issue with like the Shonen Jump scale is I'm watching these fights and they go on forever, and then at the end like the bad guy runs away and everyone is still fine.
My biggest issue with Dragon Ball was the fact that not only do they raise the stakes, but it's the exact same way in which they raise the stakes. Exactly like you just said, Toast. They always fix everything with the Dragon Balls. Death is nothing. It doesn't mean anything. We'll just get them back. And I always giggle to myself because you think, okay, well, we started off with Dragon Ball with just a small group of people, and Red Ribbon Army, and then we go to Saiyans, and then Frieza, and then Cell, and Boo, and everything else that comes after. And I'm just thinking to myself, wouldn't it be funny if Boo was the first one that showed up? Or if Cell was the first one who showed up? And it's just really frustrating because it's extremely predictable, and it's the exact same story beat. Just get stronger. Just hit it harder.
So now that we've covered the world and the characters, we will talk about integrating RPG elements. And I know Rai kind of talked about this earlier too when we were on the first slide about the RPG. Find systems and inspiration that you enjoy. So we really love the older games that kick your ass, like Final Fantasy Tactics and Disgaea and Ragnarok Online. And we took a lot of inspiration from those systems, and he implemented them beautifully.
Thank you, honey. But I'll echo what she said, and just loosely touch on these things. Find inspiration from the games you play. Whatever you enjoy, try to draw inspiration from that. Just think about how each set is used. A lot of people like to use higher thresholds, and you'll see a lot of LitRPGs use high thresholds. They'll be like, oh, he just gained 2,343,622 experience from this last fight. That is exhausting. Okay, and I mean this in the nicest way possible. I mean this with respect. To me, that comes off like the writer is banking on you not being able to keep track of all those numbers. So if they throw enough big numbers at you, you'll just be like, okay, well, it must be correct. And I don't like that. I like knowing how my system works, and I like knowing exactly where each character's place is and how they're playing an integral part of the party. So for that reason, I went with a low threshold system. I won't spoil much on Kailu's stats, but his HP is only in the few hundreds. I will say that much. When you compare that to a lot of the other characters, it doesn't sound very high, but it's very high compared to, say, Matt or Cannoli, who has a poor 10 health right here. So lower thresholds I like very much for that reason, because it's easier to keep track of.
And then for calculating bonuses on gear, we played around with gear in the first book a lot. We were trying to figure out if we should do gear set bonuses. And then I was asking how the heck that actually works, like in a literary sense, because I mean, what? So Espada crafted all these 4 pieces, but as soon as he gets a hat from like a different island, now the gear set's broken. How does the system register that? Why is that a thing? So we took out those, but we still give bonuses for like the gear that they're wearing, since it makes sense. So if you have better gear that's better made and thicker quality, it's going to give you better defense overall. And he did a really great job integrating magic into cloth. And is talking, oh, hey, monkey. Thank you. But he did a really good job making cloth affect magic too by being magically enchanted. And we talked about different ways of enchanting things that would make sense in a story, like sewing little tiny beads or sequences or extra things that are all enchanted by a certain class that give the gear its extra personality.
Yes, for that reason, I honestly had a lot of fun developing the classes that can both forge or enchant gear, because that's another opportunity to help expand your world as well. You can sit there and be like, oh, well, they're very well reputed because enchanted gear is considered very useful, because obviously you don't want to die, you want to survive in the fight. So enchanted gear is expensive and it's considered very valuable. So those who can enchant gear have high commission rates. You can play a lot with that. Perhaps the person who was enchanting all this gear makes a ton of money because of it, and they have their own business doing it. There's lots of fun things you can do here. The last thing I do like talking about with LitRPG systems, and this does not apply to the OP Pro Tag LitRPG systems because they break their world on purpose. But if you are trying to create a world with a system like ours where it tries to incorporate the systems in ways that weave itself into the world, then I encourage you to try and break it on purpose and see if it works. So what I mean by break it is think, okay, I want a spell that throws out fire, and when it catches something, it cooks people who are wearing armor from the inside. I want something like that, even if that's how fire normally works. Try to think of all the different ways you could get around it or abuse the mechanics of your systems. And if you find something like that, where it's like, oh no, I can create this loop of infinite mana if I use these two classes with their skills, you'll have to determine if you're okay with letting that go, or if you would prefer to take those skills down a notch to try and give the other classes more attention. That'll be up to you. But I encourage you to try and break your own system.
Yeah, like any skill, any stat, any bonus that you give, try and think of it as a gamer. How would I take this and totally snap this game in half? Like when I mentioned Yomi earlier and she kind of skips a class to get a spell she shouldn't have, we talked about that at length. Like, why did it happen? Could we repeat this? Would this be something else that somebody else can do? And we came up with the answer of it would be really fucking hard for anyone else to do. What she had to do wasn't the best thing ever. And they're not really looked well upon in Yarlia as a whole, so we let it go through. But make sure that it's something that will not break your world or change the rules. Like your world, you should always have some set of world rules and try not to break those in half.
Quickly, before we get into the next step too, what bothers me a lot about these LitRPG worlds is a lot of times they're also isekais, and this character somehow breaks or knows more about the world than the natives, and that's always just rubbed me the wrong way. It just doesn't make any sense that a character who knows nothing about this world is able to use assumptive knowledge to break or change a world that these characters have been living in for centuries, if not thousands of years. That's usually my issue with it, and that's why we prefer a system like this.
Quests and level ups. So I've seen the quest system, I've seen title systems where people get titles and it gives them bonuses, and you have to decide what you want in your world. Like Fo was mentioning the rep system. Is that a system that you want to keep track of? Every system you have, you're going to need to keep track of somewhere, because if you start just throwing out numbers, you could create a really bad tear, plot hole, or come off to your reader like you're not even paying attention to your own world. So you'll want to make sure that there's something that's trackable and something that makes sense. We really like quests. We've loved quests for every MMO we've ever played in, so I thought it would be fun to implement them somehow. There's passive quests and active quests, meaning does the character have to go get this quest, or does it just pop up for them? Like if they go and take an axe and slam it into a tree, does a quest pop up to take the tree down? Or do they need to go talk to an NPC and actually get, like, cut the 10 trees and I'll give you 5 apples kind of thing?
Yeah, we personally liked quests. We decided to go with a system where The men are the ones who typically get the quests, and while a quest can be assigned to catgirls from adventurers guilds, the majority of them are given by the men, and they get that through their IPA system. And it is typically given to them either through the catgirls or through their interface, so that they can better keep track of it. Let's see, and then level cap and leveling.
Fo had a question.
Fo had a question. Oh, let's see. Could you do a more skill-based level up system, or instead invest in skills? Or you could, but going back to what I said about breaking the system, you can very easily break that. For anyone who has ever played something like Final Fantasy XI or Phantasy Star Universe, those games use systems like that. The more you use a skill, the more that skill gains experience, and then you can level up that skill by using it more often. You can use a system like that, but I'm sure a lot of you can already see the problem with it in that, like, oh, if I just keep spamming this one skill over and over and over and over and over and over again, I can just cap the one skill out and blow up anything I want. So it can become a problem in that regard. You'd have to, if you want to make sure it doesn't get out of hand, I would suggest putting a limitation on it. For example, say you could actually tie it into level ups. They could actually weave themselves between one another. Say, for example, at level 1, each one of your skills can only hit a cap of 5. And at level 2, each one of your skills can hit a cap of 8, and so on and so forth.
We talked about that a little bit at the beginning. So that depends on your story. So if you want to have your skills as a separate from your level up, we integrated it to where you level up and you get a skill point. So if you want them to be two separate things, then absolutely you can do that.
Yeah, that's an option. Oh yeah, Morrowind did that too. Thank you for reminding me, Sneaky. Let's see, I like the rewards. You get the item, but it's related to the action of rather doing it. Okay. Tracking that would be a harder. Okay, soft caps. Yeah, what Sneaky said is also true. You can use soft caps. So over a threshold of experience requirements for individual skills can go up exponentially. Yeah, that's another way to do it as well.
The level cap, so we decided on a hard level cap so that we could decide our leveling curve. It's really hard to create a sustainable leveling curve if you don't have a cap for your levels. Because if you're just going into infinity, then you have to decide every single level or every single skill level what your character is going to get. Kind of like where I was saying, there's a lot of stories out there that just kind of throw that to the wind and give the character whatever they feel like the next level. But that's not sustainable for very long. You're going to lose track of it. It's just going to happen. So for us, we capped everything, I think, at 50. And it's a very, very slow leveling process. But it's smaller numbers, like lower thresholds, like he was saying before.
Right. It's one of those kinds of systems that's very rewarding if you can survive long enough. That's why so few cat girls are third class, or even so few men are third class, because it can take a lifetime to reach that point.
Yeah, Carmen, they become useless and they become meaningless. Like, okay, I hit level 944. Like, okay, so what? Like, you've done this how many freaking times?
Oh, yeah, exciting. Woo.
Another important thing to decide is whether the quests are accessible by just the main character or everyone in the world. I've seen it done both ways, where the main character has access to a UI that only gives him quests that helps him, like, catch up in the world. But with how our world is built and how the Catgirls also need to help each other, we wanted it to make it feel like a world that's been lived in for a while. So girls can post their own quests at guild halls and do them for each other and still get experience, money, whatever they need. And the guys have access to that too. The girls just don't have them from their, like, from an iPod, just the guys do.
And then how does your UI interact with the world? So most LitRPGs use some sort of like screen system where like something comes up in their head, or some sort of like super holographic sci-fi screen comes up and they can just assign points and levels however they like that way. That works. If that's something you're comfortable with, by all means do it. We decided to do something a little more comical and go with Matt getting his own version of an iPad, essentially, called the iPaw, and it's how he talks to his snarky AI and just distributes his points. This you don't really have to spend much time on this. Whatever interface works for you, use it, is what I say. Whether you want it to be a screen, something you use in your mind, a notepad, it doesn't matter. Like with most of these things, just try to remain consistent with it. And if there's a change for something, make sure there's a good reason behind it.
And yeah, that's totally okay. Like all of these things that you've asked are fine. There's no wrong way to write a story. There's just how you write it is going to be your style, your voice. It'll be awesome, and no one has told it like you. Okay, Carmen, thank you.
Have a good one.
But you can do all of these things. Just write out all these things and feel them out and see if you like them. And there will always be an audience out there for it. So what we're talking about is just how we approached it and how we go through our systems and kind of advice for if you've never done anything like a LitRPG. Like this is where we started. You say that, Terma, but like I'm on Book Talk and I see it all the time and they sell great.
Throwing some shade there.
Yeah, I'm with Jack. Don't steal anyone else's stuff and just write.
All right, I think we can move on.
Try new things. So when I was oh thanks, Bo. When I was researching LitRPG through Royal Road, I went through a bunch of them and 100% of the time they used Royal Road spreadsheets, which is fine if you want to use spreadsheets for your quests, your data, whatever. But I was like, we're making a game. Like, we're writing a game. So, oh, thank you, Retro. Have a good night. I wanted to do a cool UI that was ours, that no one else had seen before. So I worked with Kiora, and we're still working with Kiora, and she created the UI that you see for like the windows for our quests. She has done all of the sprite work. We have like 40 plus some odd sprites now for characters. And at the end of every single chapter, there's a pro tip from one of the girls or the guys that gives you either a little bit more insight to the world or kind of what they're thinking about that chapter. So a lot of people responded super well to that, and we were really excited because it's gorgeous artwork, and it was something that would help us stand out from everything else that was out there.
Yeah, I'll echo what she said. I was actually surprised to see that nobody was doing something like this, considering LitRPG, it's in the name. It uses RPG elements to tell the story. And for any of us who have played a lot of RPGs, especially like some of the older ones, you'd see a graphic like Naeem or Azara that we have up right there, and they would tell you something. You could talk to your companions, they'd have some thought to discuss with you, and I always found the sprite animations very charming. So I remember her and I were talking about it. It's like, why is nobody really using this? So we worked with Kiora and we got sprite sheets and we thought it would help us stick out, and sure enough it did. So we encourage you to try new things.
And create the classes of your dreams. Like we were kind of talking about before, if you have a class that you're like, I want to see a healer that works with cards because I fell in love with Astro on 14, so we started developing one. Or if you want to see the coolest wizard ever that uses rocks as their thing, or witch doctor who traps souls inside of rocks, like go crazy, try stuff, put it into effect and see if you like it. Right, Fo? Oh my god, I want it.
It's cool. It's really fun. I think we're good to move on. Oh, I always forget this one's here.
Let's talk about criticism.
Yeah, you have the floor.
All right, so I talk about this a lot at panels in our Discord, and I'm not going to pull it up because it makes me sad, but we get a lot of flack for our story. We got a ton of 1-star reviews when we took it down to move it to Amazon. We got a ton of 1-star reviews because we decided to do certain not safe for work chapters just for Patreon, and they were not plot relevant. Like you could read the story without the not safe for work scene and understand everything that was going on, but people got mad. We've had a ton of angry people at Matt for being a Washington soy boy who doesn't break the world fast enough and doesn't learn fast enough, and they get on him all of the time. So with that being said, the best thing that you can do is twofold. One, be kind to yourself and be patient with yourself because it hurts and it sucks, and I can never really just stress how much like it doesn't stop sucking. I wish I could say like, oh, I saw my 10th 1-star review today and I'm feeling better about them, because it really doesn't. Um, and two, be kind to the person. Yeah, it sucks. Yeah, what they said sucks. If it's on Amazon or Goodreads, you say nothing. You just let it go and walk away. If it's something on like Royal Road or Scribble Hub and you're doing a serial, just say, hey, thanks for reading my story and giving it a chance. Take care. Like, be nice, because nothing disappears on the internet and someone will find it later, and it's not worth it. Like, maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they hit the chapter at the wrong time, whatever. But it's not worth it to yourself to like get into a fight or get into an argument or try and over explain yourself. Just try and let it go. Like, yes, as Village is saying, reviews are for the readers and not for the authors. I stopped going on Goodreads because it breaks my heart, and the reviews aren't for me. They're not trying to tell me, they're trying to tell other readers. So you could be doing everything right, and there's no way your story will never appeal to everybody. Like Elix said, that's a great saying. You can be the sweetest peach and there's someone that doesn't like peaches. There is no way to write the story that every single person who picks it up will enjoy.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that as well. It's just impossible. It's an unrealistic standard, and it's not a fair standard to hold to yourself. Something Lynx and I like to do is, on occasion, we'll look up our favorite books. We'll look up the most critically acclaimed books out there, and then you can just sort by 1-stars. And suddenly I feel a lot better about myself, because the reality is there's just no one story for everybody. For every single person who likes your story, there's a very good chance there's 2 more people who don't like your story. That's unfortunately the reality. Something else to always keep in mind too is that negative opinions are statistically proven to be much more proliferant than positive opinions. If you say, oh, well, that was a really good meal, I enjoyed that, you're probably a lot less likely to leave feedback and criticism than if, the bartender never came to your table, he was 15 minutes late with the food, when the food arrived it was cold, and you leave a 1-star and you're like, I cannot believe that they did. You're naturally going to want to leave negative feedback in that case. So try to always keep that in mind as well. People have a tendency to veer towards negative criticism rather than positive feedback. Additionally, try to learn how to separate what is constructive and what is opinion. What I mean by that is, if somebody says, you know what, it didn't make sense in this last chapter that, X character did Y thing, because she was just talking about how she was accepting herself and now she's right back where she started. That's constructive feedback. That makes sense. But if somebody sits there and says, I can't stand this character, he always makes all the dumbest decisions and he never says anything useful, that's being overly negative, and that's an opinion. Especially if well, they don't know how you're trying to write your characters. That could be by intent too.
Yeah, absolutely, Village. Like, we talked about pouring ourselves into our characters. So, like, we both love Matt. Like, we pour a lot of ourselves into Matt. And so when people are like, what a fucking idiot, like, it hurts, because he's very much like where we were when we were 20 and how we would be facing these things. So you have these connections and it feels like someone is personally attacking you sometimes. So it's very, very important just to take a deep breath. Like Terma said, be professional. Um, be that author that you want to be, like, just as far as be kind, be professional, kind of let it go, and like Rai said, understand when it's constructive versus deconstructive. So exactly like he was saying, I can change this about a scene so it makes more sense, versus that's kind of how this character is, and if you don't like them, I'm sorry.
It's always very funny to me too, because I've been reading the Stormlight Archive, and I am about halfway through the 4th book. It's this huge epic fantasy series, and I kind of giggle to myself because every single character in that story messes up to some degree. They make really dumb decisions. They're very human. They make mistakes. They try to do better, and they still mess up sometimes. And I try to. One day I went ahead and I compared it to what Matt does on a daily basis, and I'm like, Matt learned a lot quicker than characters in most stories do, actually. He makes mistakes and, you know, messes up like any other person, but he did learn and he adapted and he promised to do better, and he does do better. So keep in mind too that some communities are adamant about seeing a particular story type or seeing a particular character presented in those genres. So if you break out of it a little bit, well, you might get some defensiveness.
Yeah, Sneaky said that exactly. Like, we went into this knowing that we were likely going to piss off Railroad, and we did, so I shouldn't be surprised. This like task failed successfully. Your question on opinions, Terma. So both Ryan and I kind of have a rule where if 3 people say something about like a chapter or a character, we will sit down and review it. That doesn't have to be your standard rule. It's just if I see 3 different people say like this needs to change, then I will go back and look at it and see maybe this does need to change. For example, in book 1, after Matt and Yomi, we had a few people say that Raven needs to soften up and actually talk to him. And I was like, you know what, rereading this, you're absolutely right. So I went back in and added a whole nother chapter, softened her down, made more sense, gave him more time. This is what I'm talking about with editing. Like that last half of the book is completely different than where it started because we got that feedback, and rereading it, we realized that, yeah, okay, they are right. So there are certain things that absolutely you can take opinions as constructive criticism. I thought so too, Village. Yeah, the new version is perfect. Like, I'm so much happier with how it is, but it helped having the opinions of readers who said, like, I think this should happen, which is still different than Matt's a fucking idiot, I hate him. I've had 15 people say that. It doesn't matter. Like, I love Matt and he's he's staying how he is.
Sorry, Matt is the way he is. He's a 20-year-old guy.
He is doing his best. Yeah, sometimes you need to get away from the screen, get outside, touch some grass, go get a coffee. Just don't sit there and stare at it. It's really easy to fall into this hole of all that exists is the internet and I'm never going to escape. So it's good to get away and just take a deep breath. Your story is awesome.
Like we were saying a little bit earlier, your story is fantastic. Every idea can work. It's just a matter of executing it. Something that always stuck with me and still sticks with me anytime I doubt a story idea I have may not work is if I like it, that means somebody else will like it as well. There is an audience for every story, and you just got to put your best foot forward. That's it.
I want to mention too that when we first started this, Double Blind was a brand new pen name. We had no social audience, no previous story, no previous anything. Like, we started from scratch. The Discord server was me, Rye, and one other guy for like 2 months, and we were just chatting. So we started from ground zero with a LitRPG that broke every trope that these other LitRPGs love to hold on to, with crazy anime art. And we started finding our audience. Like, they were there. So whatever your story is, whatever the plot, whatever characters, it's going to be awesome because no one has ever told a story like you have. And there will always be an audience with it. Like Rai said, if you like it, then someone else will love it.
Is that the rest of the panel?
Yeah, unless there's any more questions.
Yeah. At this point, it's open for discussion.
We're also in the desert. We go outside and kick the cactus, except we don't because it hurts like hell.
Yeah. I had thorns sticking out of my finger for at least 2 months. I don't want that again.
Stupid yard work. Hello, Toasty. We can take questions on LitRPG, characters, world, panel, streaming. We're going to talk more on Wednesday about actually like posting a web serial and our experience with it. So we'll be going way into that, like all the websites we use, etc.
Yeah, so if you have any questions pertaining to that, hold off just until Wednesday, because we'll be going into it very in depth.
Oh, you can absolutely turn that into a unique concept. Look, like I have a lit RPG with a world full of catgirls. It's the most like generic sounding thing ever. Um, you can definitely do 5 MacGuffin items and still make the story unique with different things that happen along the way and kind of different characters you would expect.
I mean, that's the entire basis for the original Final Fantasy game. Find the 4 magic elemental crystals and save the world. Those kinds of ideas will always work. Because keep in mind, what a lot of people forget is, okay, it may have been done before, but there is always a new generation of people being born who have never read a story like that. And that it's very easy to forget that, because it's like, well, that story exists. Yeah, but somebody may not have read it. So that your story might be the first time they're seeing that.
Motivation issues and writer's block. We're going to talk about this on Wednesday too, but number one, the first thing to remember forever is that there is no such thing as a muse. The muse is dead. We, both Ryan and I talk about this extensively, and we are lucky to get quote unquote the muse with like a couple of times a year. Like there's very few times where I sit down and I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to write. But once I start writing, even if the first few sentences absolutely suck, I get into it and I will start feeling it and feeling the world again. And I can always go back and change those first few sentences. Muse is kill. Yes, no muse. You have to create a habit. Um, that's like my number one piece of advice for writing is to sit down every single day for 15 minutes and write something, whether it is 10 words or 1,000 words. Just set that time aside every day for 15 minutes. And after the first week, if you're liking it, you can up that to 30 minutes. But that is what will get you writing, and that's what will get the words on the page.
I'll also, this may not work for you, but something that works for me to try and get rid of writer's block is I just force myself to write a few sentences, like she said. But I've always been the kind of person where I can basically just blank out of real life and just picture scene for scene what's going on in the world and just create a scenario in my head. And it doesn't have to be a scenario I actually use in the story or the chapter or anywhere. I can just create this image in my head and have it play out. For me, that helps tremendously because it helps me get involved in the world or whatever's going on. And then ideas sometimes spurn from there. So I may sit here and think, okay, well, the next chapter is about Raven. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about like a conversation between Raven and Lara and them bickering back and forth and thinking about like what she's dealing with, what Lara's dealing with. And then suddenly it's just like, oh, you know what? Actually, this would be kind of a neat idea to do here or there. And I may run with that. I may use it, I may not. But it can kind of help me hit the ground running. And eventually, once you do this enough times too, you'll find a rhythm. But to second what she said, the muse is dead. I don't wait for the muse. I can't wait for the muse. If I was waiting for the muse with any of my work, with any of my commission work, with any of Catgirl's, I'd be living in a box right now. So that's not really an option for me.
At its heart, I've had a lot of conversations with writers and other published authors. You have to remember why you love writing and why you're writing in the first place. I feel like a lot of people, when they first approach this, they ask a lot of questions, kind of similar to foes. Is it all right to do this? Is it all right to do this? Is it all right to this? And they worry about the audience. Don't worry about the audience until you have a story written and you can start marketing to them. That is when you need to worry about your audience. At its core, I write because I love it. I write because I have always disappeared into worlds as my safe place. I've read thousands of books and it's something that I wanted to do for myself. So when I write, I want to disappear into these worlds for a while. I want to explore their characters and I want to explore what they're feeling at the moment. And it's a coping mechanism. It's an imagination practice. It's everything to me. Whereas like at the end of it, when I start editing, that's when I start thinking about where I want to go with it and like where I need to adjust things where maybe the readers will be a little bit confused here and there. Yeah, so Calamity, I was born back in the day of no computers and iPads. I didn't have a computer until I was like 16, so I was reading like 40 books every summer from 8 years old on. So we have a variable library.
Yeah, it's really quite impressive. She outreads me by a mile.
Do we struggle to come up with names for literally everything? So I really like to look up words in different languages, and sometimes I'll be like, hey, I want to name this character after fire or after whatever. It was really funny with Catgirls. The first few Catgirls are named after what we thought their favorite item was going to be. So Kiki was cake, Cannoli was like Italian pastries, and Raven was birds. And then we ditched it, and so we were like, I guess it's time to start actually like choosing names. So I'll use name generators, I'll use baby name websites, and just kind of pick a country and go. Uh, we Rye is really good at naming monsters. Like, I don't know how he comes up with these. I'll just be like, hey, I need a lizard thing that can hop up on its back feet and scream, and he'll like spit out a name at me.
I have a penchant for monster design, if anybody couldn't tell.
Same village, and I've bought like baby name books at garage sales. And, oh, are you having a kid? No, I need this for characters. I think Fo did join the Discord. I saw them. Foxy person. I was going to say, unless they came in and left, but oh, did you join the Discord? Fo, you should come back if you did. Come hang out.
Yeah, I like to use name generators sometimes. Let me see. Let me find the website real quick.
Oh, you're under 18. Okay, yeah. Once those 2 weeks have passed, come back. That's great that you're young and you're looking at doing this. I'm 36 and Rye's 35. And I published my first book when I was early 20s. The best thing I can say is just keep writing. Like, your first book might not be the one that you wind up publishing. I have probably 10, 40,000 plus word stories that never will see the light of day from when I was 15, 16 doing NaNoWriMo. But that is how you learn, is to write more. Like, in this last 3 years, I think Ryan and I both have written 3 million words.
Yep. I'll second that. You're going to stumble and you're going to fail a lot, and that's totally okay. That's how you learn. You're going to be learning until the day you're gone. So her and I are still learning things to this day about writing technique, prose, you name it. So don't be afraid of the story not being good or not being perfect in some ways. You're going to mess up. There's no getting around that. And it's best to kind of embrace it rather than dwell on it, because that's not going to help you.
Exactly. My very, very first like big story I wrote, it is on the internet and I will never share it with any of you. But one of the main characters is a vampire who had devil wings that gets in a fight and his wings turn into angel wings, and the main character had mood changing eyes. Like, oh my god, every horrible teen trope you can think of is in that freaking story. It's just, I learned from writing that. I learned more pacing, and I learned from Catgirls. I have learned an exponential amount. It is peak Wattpad. It is so bad. It's so bad. Wife, I might send it to you. But it's just like, the best thing you can do is keep writing. Don't worry about whether it's right or wrong, or if an audience is going to love it. It doesn't matter. Just write it for yourself and enjoy the process.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to add as well.
Calamity, that's a good thing if you already can detect good versus bad criticisms.
That is one of the most important skills you can learn if you are going to put yourself out there publicly. And that's not just for writing, that's for any sort of public image.
Yeah, and like I said, on Wednesday we'll talk more about publishing. I'll talk to you about social media platforms that have worked for us, the websites that we published to, kind of how we built up the double blind name. So we will go into that. Like that's another. It will take a couple hours to get through everything, since this was like a experiment in a vacuum that's turned out really well, thankfully.
And hey, um, as we said before earlier, Double Blind was a name that didn't exist until 3 years ago. So we are living proof that you can do this if you really want to. You just got to keep at it.
Foe, start writing. Stop world building. You're getting into world building hell. That's way too long.
Yeah, that's way too much. No, you've world built way too much.
It's enough. You've got plenty. Start writing them. Dana, you're not scared to write. You're scared to show it to me. Don't lie to the group.
I have your book saved in a PDF.
I still need to read what you sent me.
Yeah, world building is, and I've done this personally because I wish I could show you guys my screen. I have a folder for my original sci-fi story that has, no joke, 12 different WordPad documents, each one of them tackling a different subject. And it's paralyzing because eventually you just get to a point where you're just too scared to write, but you still want to create this world. You still want to envision this setting. And that's not going to do anything for you if you can't start writing it.
Yeah, like I said, sometimes when you get into it and you start writing, you find that your characters are totally deviating from the world rules that you created, and you're going to be adjusting it. I know for some people this works great, but like 3 months of world building and no writing in it yet, time to start writing in it. You can keep world building as you're writing. That's great. It's just like if all you're doing is world building, then you gotta start writing stuff in it.
That can be a paralyzing concept, Elix. Yeah. A good part of what makes Catgirls fairly easy to write at times is we know how it ends. From the very, very first moment we conceptualized it, we knew how it ended. So yeah, I would suggest figuring that out first. Figuring out what does the character want to do, or how do you want the story to end. It doesn't have to be super complex. Just something simple like he discovers a technology that changes the world. It can be something as simple as that. And so that way it gives you a guiding path, because you've got the beginning, you've got the end, and now you can just fill in the middle with whatever you need to get you to that point.
Yeah, Neko, don't send 700 words to your artist. I will cry for them. It's too many words. Here, I'll show you what our reference images look like for our artists.
Oh yeah. Huh?
Yeah, they're fun. So like, this is ours. This is a good one. So that's if I have art of them already. I'll do that with like a little bit of a description. And then if I don't have art of them, I just sent this one last night actually, Anush. Thank you guys. Yeah, so these are actually really helpful too for character boards. So if you're really struggling to find how to set up your characters, go on Pinterest and just put in like cyberpunk woman, because you can't put girl anymore, it won't let you. Or just Google like where they're from. Like last night I put in Polish and got some really cool armor ideas and stuff. And then just throw them together and you have them for references later. Yeah, Bardish, you're awesome. And I mean, Hussar armor is badass, so we're going with it. Is having a cold open as the prologue that ties back into the story later okay? Yeah, you can do that if you want.
That actually makes for a good resolution later once the climax hits.
Yeah, like the first book in Stormlight Archive has a prologue that happened forever ago, and you're not really sure like why the hell that has anything to do with the story. But as you read, like the knowledge trickles in, and you're like, oh no, oh god, and it just slowly starts to click. So I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, the severity of what happened at the very beginning starts to hit. You're like, oh no. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. Once again, execution. That's what matters.
Also be careful with prologues. I didn't know this because I used to write prologues all the time, But apparently there are people who skip them and see the word prologue and then they just search for chapter 1 and don't read them at all. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not kidding. People skip the prologue. They see the word prologue and they're just like, nope, I'm good. Also, I'm now realizing that Foe totally backed the Kickstarter and wasn't 18.
It's not illegal.
It's fine. They'll be 18 in 2 weeks.
No, books are definitely one of those kinds of things where it's dependent on the reader level.
No, it made me laugh.
But let's see. But yeah, I've run into people who do skip the prologue. Most of my friends, almost all of them, said that they skip the prologue. It's just like, oh, this is stuff I don't need to know. Skip.
I mean, you can be my mom and grab our books and look for the pretty art. Just skip everything. Just look for the art. I know. Kiwi, like, why? It's part of the book. Like, it's usually a good heart for the book because that sets up the beating heart. And it just, how do you freaking skip that? Who are these people we just introduced? I don't know. We met them at some con. EAC art book when? I mean, when we get more than like 50 people who'd be willing to buy an art book.
Yeah, the number would be pretty small, so we can't warrant that, especially since art books are expensive to produce. Anything with full color, a nightmare.
We have like Catgirl stuff stacked in our office from the cons. I'm like, I can't buy anything else. I'm still dying from con costs.
We have talked about calendars though. That has come up a couple times.
I really want the tarot card deck, so hopefully. Terma, stop skipping prologues. I will come out there and read you prologues out loud from as many books as I can. Oh, we had a wonderful time at cons this year. It's just why we're taking a break, because I'm like, we need to get rid of as much of this stuff. We have so many enamel pins and keychains.
So what Term is basically telling me is that books should stop using the term prologue to describe their first chapter.
Yeah, just make it chapter 1. Just ditch the word prologue.
Yeah, just ditch the word. And just say 450 years ago or something to help imply when it took place.
So Village, we actually have a store called Merchants of Nearlia, and we have all the enamel pins up there, the washi tape, the keychains. What's missing really are the stickers. Like, we have a ton of stickers and I just haven't had a chance to list them all, and we only get 50 listings, so I have to kind of bundle them. Yeah, we have washi tape. It's so freaking cute. It looks like it's like islands. Say less. I'll show you after the stream. But I wanted to wait on doing like any sale until after the Kickstarter, because the Kickstarter is where we have them for least expensive. So I'm hoping people will add on stuff, but I'll show it to you. Oh, that's a cool idea, Jana. I like that.
I like little touches like that. That adds some character to it.
All of our chapters are themed. That just kind of turned into like a... I don't know how it started. It wound up that the first 4 chapters started with B, and we named the 5th chapter something else, and I'm like, oh no, it needs to start with B.
I was gonna say, I think that's exactly how it happened. Like, it was a complete accident that the first 3 or 4 chapters started with B. So then we were like, well, wait a second. Why don't we make this a thing? Like, every 5 chapters is a theme. And just kind of took off from there.
We've had community picked themes and hilarious themes. We've had like anything from Taylor Swift songs to types of trees. Welcome home, Neko. I'm glad you can go through your con buys. I haven't gotten to wear my new shirt. But yeah, we're just passing 7 o'clock, so we can answer a few more questions and then we're going to call the stream. How do you handle main characters being part of a faction in the world? Right? You're writing something like that.
That's a little too vague because there's a lot of contextual information that's necessary to know how that's being done. There is a story I'm working on. I can't talk much about it because I did sign a non-disclosure agreement. But there is a story that I'm working on that deals with several different factions, 3 to note, and they control much of the world and how it works. But they're also big powerhouses. It also happens to be a cyberpunk world, so I know a lot of the concepts you're referring to. But the main character is trying to figure out where his place is in the world as far as these things are concerned, because he stumbles upon something he shouldn't. And yeah, I don't want to divulge much more.
Yeah, I agree with him that that's like a really vague setting. So, ooh, that's a good question. Do we like first person or third person more? I am so on the fence. This is a really, really hard question for me. Usually, I like second person can be really effective if used correctly. I've done it twice. But I generally like third person more, even though like there's third person limited and third person omniscient. Third person omniscient, you know everything that's going on from every character's thoughts and perspectives, and I really don't like that. I feel like that ruins a lot of the mystery in the story. So third person limited for sure. But first person, I feel like lets you get way more into the character's head.
Yeah, so I like every single one of these writing perspectives, even second person to a point. First person was my favorite way to write until I started getting into other works like our Catgirl story and reading more third person stories. First person story where it really really excels is getting you into the character's voice. So the character can phrase things and pronounce things however they like, and it doesn't have to be grammatically correct. It doesn't have to be ethically correct. You can have extremely opinionated dialogue and narrative. It can be extremely faulty. So it's very entertaining. It's extremely entertaining writing because it's in the character's words. It's in the character's own words. So you can help emphasize how intelligent they are, how street smart they are, how stupid they are, how foolish they are, whatever you want. It's a very, very fun way to write, and it was my favorite way to write for a while. Third person omniscient, I personally think that's just not a writing style people should use in general because it takes away mystery. It takes away question. It really destroys inquiry. I just don't like it for that reason because it explains everything. There's never any reason to keep asking questions. Third person limited is something that I've definitely grown more attached to as we've started writing the chapters from the Catgirl's perspectives and from the other men as well, like Kailu and Tristan. And this is one of the more powerful writing styles in my opinion, just because you can explain more about what's going on in the world from a limited point of view without having the character see everything at every point. So you have more options than first person would give you. And then lastly, second person. Second person is really personal. So that's like the narrator talking directly to you and telling you what you're doing, what you're thinking. I personally think second person storytelling is more effective for short stories. I think that's where it excels, because going on any more than a short story, it always makes me feel like I'm being personally attacked or being personally involved, and that can get a little too, well, personal for my taste. I don't know if you've got any more input on that.
Elix, to answer your third person limited with a few first person chapters, I don't know if I would really do that. So ours is the exact opposite, where we start with Matt as first person chapters mostly, and then we start switching to third person like in the side quests, and then any of the other guys when they do their point of view for third person. Um, Matt is only the first person. I have edited a pretty good amount of work where there's character switches and they're all in first person. Like every character is in first person, and it gets really confusing, especially if you're not really careful to make all of their voices sound very unique. It can sound like the same person, you can get confused. I know stories like Game of Thrones, and then, like we said, Stormlight Archive, a lot of epic fantasies all go from third person from different chapters. Joe Abercrombie is another one. So they do multiple characters, but all of them are third person. Yeah, Matt is the only first person in the story. Everyone else is third person perspective. So Tosi, first person is Matt. So he's talking to himself kind of, or the reader, and I, me, my, using those kinds of attributes. Third person is she, her, them, where it's not an I and it's outside of their head, but you can still throw in their thought processes. What I want to kind of touch on with something Rai said is with third person, you can still very much make their voice sound like them, even though it's not a first person point of view. I think it's really important to keep in mind what characters think, feel, and their backgrounds, and use terminology, words, and verbiage that apply to them. So, for example, Kailu, all of his chapters are in third person in our series, but Graham really freaking hates those chapters when I go through them because I use like archaic language and I don't use contractions to make sure that it sounds more uppity and noble. Or like Portia's chapters are third person, but they're way more laid back and relaxed and more sailor piratey. So
Yeah, so, and I'm going to add to that. First person, if you do decide to go with that, it's extremely effective if it's a more personal story to that character. If you're going to be swapping between characters and they're all being first person, I would actually advise against that because that's going to be extremely difficult to write. With third person limited, you have a lot more breathing room because you can still use pretty much the same narrative for the most part, but make minor changes like she was talking about with Kailu. Like if you go to Kailu's chapters and read how that's described, if you go to Raven's chapters and read how those are described, or Saris's, you'll notice that the language used in Saris, Raven, and Kailu's chapters is much more eloquent, much more educated. They use bigger words, and that's to help reflect the way the character thinks. That's how that's effective. But if you go through first person and you're trying to jump characters, well, you can imagine how jarring it would be to read first person Matt and then first person Tristan, first person Kailu, first person Raven. They're all going to describe things drastically different. And that's going to be very difficult for you as a writer to consistently keep up on because you are constantly jumping into a completely different personality and seeing the world through their eyes.
yeah, first person with multiple perspectives can be so hard to get different voices. And especially, I think part of that is due to when a reader is reading a book, or like when I'm reading a book, if it says I, me, my, I am putting myself in their shoes way easier than a lot of third person narratives where I like take on their mantle of I, me, my. So I just read The Martian, and that switches from first person to third person in different chapters, but Mark's chapters always felt a lot more like personal to me because he's using I, me, my. So if you're switching these chapters, then I have to like re-switch gears in my brain to be this new character now. Like I am no longer Mark Walkney, I am somebody else. It does, yeah. All of his logs are all first person, so they're all I am fucked. Like I need to do this. I did this today. And then the chapters where it's from Earth's point of view, where it's actually like they're at NASA or they're talking about how to get him down there, those are all in third person. And there's even sometimes scenes in the book where it switches from a log to like third person of what's happening to Watney as he's like traveling down and like the rover flips. Like that's all told from third person.
Yeah, exactly what she said. Like third person would be like, oh, Matt went to the restroom, and as he went to the restroom, he thought of Kiki's brown hair. That's third person. But if it was first person, it would be like, I went to the restroom. I went to the restroom. So you're hearing it in Matt's voice. I went to the restroom, and all I could think about was Kiki's brown hair. That's basically the difference. I, me, my, he, she, them. That's basically the big difference. Third person limited is also very nice for taking the reader away from the story and viewing it like an audience member at a movie theater. They're seeing a story play out in their head on the screen, and they don't have to worry about being a part of it. Whereas first person, like she said, exactly like she said, it's more personal because you're feeling everything that character feels because they're going to describe everything they're feeling. If you read Matt's chapters, for example, like especially like towards the end of book 1 with what goes on with Yomi, he expresses in the narrative, you hear all of his thought processes, how he describes how he feels. And so it makes Matt's experience more personal and more visceral for that reason.
There's a term called in media res, which means starting in the middle of a story, and you can start either one, whichever you prefer. If you do start in media res, then later you try to like publish it. What you want to make sure is that you're still catching your reader up. Don't leave your reader on the outside. I've read stories where it starts in the middle, but it's not explaining anything to me, so I feel like I'm just gripping the edge of my bed, like when will they finally tell me what the heck is going on? So you can still start in the deep end and start with something exciting that's already happening, but make sure to leave little hints for your reader, or else they're just going to be kind of trumping along like they're hooked onto the back of the car. What's your opinion on mixing perspectives based on the events of the story, where more personal scenes are first but larger scale exposition events are third? Martian did that, and it depends on the story and what you're doing. If it's like a fantasy story and you start in first person and then swap to third and it's still from the first person's point of view like the whole time, it feels really jarring to me. But I mean, there's probably readers out there for it. I haven't seen it.
And just real quick, third person beyond what I explained before with I, me, my, and he, she, them. What you'll often see too is thoughts are placed in italics.
That's 99 with third and first.
Yes, that's with third and first. That's usually like the character's internal thought. That's what they're thinking in that moment. That's usually how that's described in literature.
And a lot of times you can still swap them. You can, exactly like using devices, you can swap it depending on how you want it to look. I kind of touched on this loosely in the Discord the other day because Terma had asked about italics, and I'll have statements of like what's happening that could be considered a character thought, but I don't want to overuse the italics because it looks really graphically bad on the page. So that comes down to opinion sometimes. That sounds good to me, Fo. Hey, Toast, it's okay if this doesn't make sense to you. If you enjoy reading, that's what matters. And like, this is writing a story 101. This is the stuff that we've been studying and playing with and learning for 20 plus years now. So it's okay to not get it. I suck at math, and you're like a math physics whiz. But since we're coming up on 7:15, it's been about a 2-hour stream, we're gonna go ahead and stop here. Absolutely hop in our Discord, follow the channel. We do writing streams on this channel now too. So you can ask us questions when we're writing or in the Discord. And then Wednesday night, we will talk about how we published our web serial and what we all went through to get that going.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing you all there.
Thank you so much for coming to our stream and checking out our online panel workshop thing. You've been awesome, and we love you guys.
Thank you so much, everybody. Really, really appreciate you. Love all of you, and we hope to see you again soon.
Talk to you soon.